Anas, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
It's been a while we haven't spoken, and a lot has happened since we last spoke, especially 2 days ago when the gas fields in Iran, which are Iran's biggest as well as the world's biggest, were struck by Israel. We're not sure whether Trump knew or not. Reports initially indicated that he did know. Later, he put a truth post, and then Netanyahu also said publicly that Trump did not know. I'm leaning more to he knew. And then what Iran did in response is retaliate by striking gas fields in, I think, Qatar. And that would take years to repair. And it was a limited strike nonetheless to ensure that Iran does not want to escalate this. They don't want their gas fields completely obliterated. But that limited strike also impacted the gas fields in Qatar. Energy prices has been gone up since we last spoke. So let me just start with a broad question on us is, what do you make of the state of the war right now?
So let me start with a recap of what we have until now. This is a historic event that will shape energy markets and world trade for generations to come. This is unlike the 1973-1974 energy crisis. This is unlike the Iran-Iraq war. This is unlike the Kuwait invasion by Iraq. This is unlike the invasion of Iraq. This is unlike the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. This is completely different and so big and so significant that it is going to reshape everything we can imagine. Whether intended or not, that's a different story. But the idea here is you look at the impact worldwide, and the impact is, first of all, global, but yet the agents basically are getting the brunt of it. And the impact is throughout industries. It's not only oil and gas industry, it's throughout those industries. Where it's hitting the agricultural sector, it's hitting the industrial sector, it's hitting the tourism sector. So we have something that we have not seen before. This is unlike COVID. COVID, we did not have destruction of capacity. Here we have destruction of capacity. COVID affected supply chains, but the supply chain was later basically reconnected, fixed. This is not going to fix supply chain. We are going to have serious problems. So that's number one. Number two, the damage to the GCC countries is massive. I know some people sometimes get emotional when they hear something like this because they are very nationalistic and they have the right to do that. But the fact is the damage is massive. And the reason why it is massive, because it's not only about oil and gas. Those countries been trying to diversify their incomes for the last 40 years. So they adopted industrial policies, they adopted tourism policies, trying to diversify, and all of that got hit at once. So the impact on those countries is huge. We heard Netanyahu yesterday saying something very strange when he said, well, they can build pipeline through Israel so they can get rid of Hormuz Strait. And either this is a kind of really a statement uncalled for, or if we got to dig deeper into it and say, well, there is something more into the story than that. The problem, and I will end this introduction with it, the problem we have right now is there is no solution or alternative. The reason why, because we've seen big accounts on Twitter basically suggesting, oh, we can build a canal to go around the Hormuz Strait through Oman, and that will solve the problem. Or we can truck the oil through the Rab al Khali, the empty quarter, and solve the problem. That's complete nonsense. And the reason why, because technology in the last 15 years have advanced so much that a couple of young people with $500 worth of technology, they can wreak havoc on anything, anywhere. So a canal is not going to solve it. Pipelines are not going to solve it. Any of that stuff is not going to solve it. What's going to solve it basically is we have to look at the whole situation, who is causing those wars, why those wars are taking place, and that's where the solution is. You want to solve the problem of Hormuz Strait, literally there is no other solution except literally ending the war. Otherwise, it's patching the patch, patching the patch of the patch of the patch, And that's what we are seeing today.
Whew, there's a lot you said there I want to unpack. So first one is, this is worse than all the various regional wars in the past few decades, as well as worse than COVID and the Ukraine war. Can you break down further why is it worse? Because I understand that a lot of these Gulf countries, when they cannot export their oil, they have to stop. Their depots get filled up really quickly because they cannot continue extracting oil. So that's issue number one. So they have to shut down all the refineries, and they take a long time to restart. Number one. Number two is some of the damage that was caused at various installations, like the gas plant in Qatar, like the Fujairah plant in, like the depot in Oman, the one in Dubai as well, all significant ones. And they've had significant damage as well. And also reopening, there's so many ships in the Strait of Hormuz that are stuck. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz, it would take a long time to clear the backlog. So I understand that these are issues, you'll probably explain them further. These are issues that make this different to something you can fix in the click of a finger. But haven't we had the same thing in the last few decades, in the Iraq War 1 and 2, in the war between Iraq and Kuwait, and even less so in the Ukraine war? But wouldn't that the same issue apply in these wars as well?
None basically apply. If we have time, I can go over every incident and cite the differences between what we have now and at that time. If you go back even to the Iraq-Iran war, the industries in the Gulf were not that developed, especially when you talk about the petrochemical plants, the fertilizer plants, everything else. Most of them did not exist at that time. At the same time, the tourism that became as like one of the pillars of the income diversification did not exist that time. So there are those major differences. And then if you look at those places, especially when you look at the Gulf countries, you look at Saudi Arabia, they got the reputation for being, in a sense, safe places.
Oh, sorry. So Anas, when you say it's worse, you mean it's worse for this region, not for the world, or both?
No, for the whole world. I'll tell you why for the whole world. Because those countries were really the security valve in terms of spare capacity that can be discharged whenever there are shortages in the world. So everyone was depending on the spare capacity in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for example, to be utilized whenever we have a crisis around the world. Now, basically, you are shutting it down. That's something new we did not see before. The other issue that we have to focus on is, if you are going to have any contract right now in the Gulf, you are adding a risk premium. Wherever you are, you want to import from the Gulf right now, you have to add that risk premium no matter what. So that's an additional cost to the world because of it. So you talk about shipping, you have to add that risk premium. That was not the case before. So the impact basically is on the whole world. The other related issue that we, and I think the Saudi foreign minister stated that in a way that was extremely clear and elegant when he said, okay, if we are going to negotiate right now, whatever left from that trust is gone. He's talking about the Iranians. So whatever that trust, that lack of trust basically will have a premium in the market. So so there are differences.
The lack of trust, the lack of trust in the stability of the region?
In a sense, there was always this hope that there could be some deal between the Saudis and the Iranians, between the Gulf states and Iran. And we've seen some negotiations going on, simply because Chinese there was some trust.
Yeah, Chinese brokered negotiations between Saudi and Iran were pretty significant. And there was that understanding that Gulf countries will have to coexist with an Iran that can be a threat in theory, but there is a level of deterrence by having American bases there. And, you know, both sides having the ability to significantly hurt each other's economy, that Iran will not attack the Gulf and the Gulf will not attack Iran. So there was like a mutual understanding, that the mutual deterrence that was there, that allowed the region, at least the countries that matter when it comes to the global energy market, to coexist. And this has been shattered now. And that breaking of trust in the Middle East between the big player Iran and the rest of the countries would now make it more expensive. There'll be a premium on anything that comes out of there, any production facilities, because you never know when things could light up again, and that premium means it has to be passed on for the rest of the world. Is that what you're saying? And does
Yes,
that, so,
absolutely.
and if that's
And
true,
we've seen
doesn't that
this. Sorry.
reinforce? Sorry, and I want to add one more thing. Doesn't that reinforce the theory that Iran now has to be defanged? There's a lot of talk about Gulf countries now telling the US, you have to finish your job. They didn't want the war, but now that the war happened, you have to finish your job to ensure now that Iran never has the ability to cause havoc again, to avoid that premium that you're talking about. So is the Gulf now in a difficult position where they have no choice but to destroy Iran's military capabilities, or allow
I
the US
think
to
you
do
have
so?
to look at the situation in two ways, and I think this is important to focus on. This is all, I mean, probably you have access to uh, people who are more specialist in the politics of Iran than me. But two things happened that nullify this idea. The first one is the killing of Khamenei and the
Mm,
attack on the gas facilities in Iran. Both of them
mm,
basically were intended, and we even talked about this 3 4 months ago. So this is not something kind of like a genius idea or something. No, if this was expected. So what happened right now is by killing Khamenei and attacking the center, Israel guaranteed the retaliation by Iran. But yes, now you know the government, you know where the IRGC are, you know where their positions are. You can attack it, you can defend, you can use whatever to protect the other countries. This is not the problem. The problem is you have fringe groups, whether within Iran, in Iraq, in the Gulf countries, in Yemen, in those countries. No one knows who they are. No one knows what their objectives are. With little money and little technology, they can wreak havoc. So even if the Iranian government
mm.
and or the regime guaranteed that there will be nothing and no attacks at all, they cannot control those groups. So by killing Khamenei and attacking the gas facilities, basically, Israel opened a can of worms that no one can cap, no one can close, and this is really the serious problem. A lot of people, and especially in Iraq, are very angry. So how you are
Yeah.
going to close that can of worms? That's really where the issue is.
Yeah, it's like when you use a nuclear weapon. When you cross that line, the world changes. So essentially, in the energy market, the world changed when 2 days ago Israel attacked the gas fields in Iran, because that just broke an unwritten rule. You don't strike the energy industry for the sake of the world, for the sake of each other's economy. You just fight based on a certain rules of engagement, and those have been broken. And the uncertainty that that has created is going to be reflected in energy prices for a long time to come. Do you think
Absolutely.
Trump? Do you think Trump knew that Israel was going to attack that gas field?
I have no clue. I have no idea. But one thing is very clear that the pressure from the Gulf countries on Trump is huge, is massive. And we've seen some people who are influential. They are not part of the government, but they are influential. They went public, basically accusing Trump of not defending those countries, etc. That reflects that there is a lot of anger in those countries at the Trump administration for what happened and the chaos they have. Many businesses, basically, whether we like it or not, again, I mean, I know some people get emotional, but I don't want them to be offended with what I'm saying. Many businesses are going to close down in the region. I mean, this is something that uh, you know sales are down. Some stores are not selling anything, etc. So we are going to see serious problems. In fact, if we see factories far away in South Korea and others closing down because of the crisis, you can imagine what will happen in the Gulf. This is a historic event with historic implications. And the people of the Gulf are going to pay a very heavy price for a war they have nothing to do with.
What about the alternative? Can't the war, if Trump seeks an off ramp? So there's two other alternatives. Alternative number one is Trump seeks an off ramp now. It's the end of it, and it's back to business as usual to an extent. Obviously, there's going to be a seismic shift in alignment of these Gulf nations, that they're going to be closer to the US. closer to rivals like China, they're in a very tricky position. And obviously not all Gulf nations are the same. Oman, Saudi, UAE, Qatar are very different. Bahrain, very different Gulf countries with their very different objectives and strategies. But back to the possibility, though, that this does end sooner rather than later. It is back to business as usual. There might be some premiums to cover for the increased risk, and that makes energy prices from the region more expensive. But that's about it. It's not as existential as you're making it sound. And the alternative number two, I'm going to give you two possible positive alternatives. Alternative number two is the war continues, but Trump just keeps, and Israel keep bombing the hell out of Iran to a level where, okay, they could disrupt with drones, but firing 10 missiles at a Gulf country and 30 drones versus firing 2 drones is very different. And if the war does weaken Iran significantly and then eventually ends, obviously it's going to end someday, wouldn't that also mean that the Gulf nations could go back to business as usual? And also the premium of the risk might actually drop, because I know there's more instability, but also Iran after this war is going to be very different to Iran before this war, especially if we see a regime change. I know it's looking unlikely, but if we see a regime change that's more pragmatic and more business-minded and less ideological, then that might make Iran weaker militarily and less willing to disrupt the region, and that would mean lower risk premiums as well. So I want to get your thoughts on that other alternative that's a lot more rosy.
There is something in the political literature that is well known, that why do we have Hezbollah in Lebanon that strong? And the reason why, because you have a very weak government. If you have a very strong government, you won't have something like Hezbollah. So weakening the government in Iran basically is going to have its own consequences too, by kind of splinter groups basically mushrooming all over the place without control. And if you remember when Bremer went to Iraq after the invasion, there is a statement basically, I don't know how accurate it is basically, but he was kind of like looking for the key to Iraq. And what was the key? They want someone who can control. And they found Sistani, who issued fatwas basically telling all the Shia fighters not to fight the American groups. And basically they were able to control all of Iraq as of that. So the issue here is you want that control. You don't want things to be very loose. They want the Taliban to control Afghanistan because they don't want Afghanistan to be a loose place. They want the control of the military in Venezuela because they don't want things to be loose in Venezuela. The same thing in Syria. They want certain group who has boots on the ground, who can control rather than to have them loose. So the issue here is, if you are going to have a very weak government in Iran, then you are going to end up with those problems that we've seen in every country around the world. When the government of Colombia was very weak, we've seen militants basically were very strong. When you have a strong government in Colombia, militants basically lost control. So that's another dimension that we have to be mindful of. And the other issue we have to focus on, related to everything we are saying, the world is changing, and changing in a way that is really bad way. And I'll tell you why. I'm not being pessimistic here, but that's what the data, that's what the trends are going. Even before this war, because of the trade wars, because of the sanctions, because of the tariffs, because of the forcing LNG basically on everyone and trying to use it as a weapon, how the other countries are responding. We know China for several years now basically are responding by trying to emphasize the link between energy security and national security, to emphasize the link between the energy industries and national security. In other way, they are trying to make energy resources a national security issue. And what that means is you have more government control, more government intervention in those industries, Therefore, there will be no control from the market on those. It's the government who decide that. Now, because of the Trump policies on trade and sanctions and other things, etc., we've seen Europe basically is adopting the Chinese model by making energy sources a national security issue. And we've seen Canada doing the same. Now, this war is going to accentuate this trend, where countries are going to look at energy sources as a national security issue. And therefore, if the US is weaponizing LNG, I'm going to weaponize everything too. And that is dangerous because markets are not going to have enough control of those energy sources. And we are not going to have the right investment at the right time for the right commodity, because politicians are determining what to do in the energy sector. So what we've seen in Europe right now, or before that, let me say what we've seen in China. For China, the subsidies, of course, they are subsidizing everything. In economics and finance does not make sense. But when you tell them, look, going solar and wind to this extent and having the storage batteries that you need to subsidize forever does not make sense. And they tell you, well, look, this is a national security issue. When someone invoke national security this way, all the economics is gone. All the finance issues are gone. So you can pay as much money as you can, and businesses basically become kind of just taking advantage of the subsidies and depending more on the government, so the government will have more say in the economy in this case. Europe is going this way right now. They are saying, look, I want to reduce my dependence on US LNG. I'm already eliminating the Russian gas from my picture. I'm going to reduce my dependence on US LNG, but I don't have resources. So the only resources I have left is solar and wind. And because of limited land, I cannot expand on land. Now I'm going to go offshore. I go offshore, that's very expensive, does not make any sense. But I need batteries too. I need storage batteries. It does not make any sense when you look at the economics and the finance. But when they invoke national security, they can do all of that. And they look at it as wind and solar and batteries and electric vehicles, in this case, are a national security issue. Canada is going that way now. Now with this war, other countries are looking at it that way too. Why? I am sorry. Look at Australia, for example, right now. It's funny that Australia is on the other side of the world, but they are suffering because they don't have enough jet fuel. And the United States literally have to rescue Australia by sending jet fuel to Australia, which they never done before. So now Australia basically is going to say, look, this is a national security issue because my airline industry just stopped. And this is where any way you look at it, we are not going to go back to normal.
So you're saying that because of what happened in Iran, what happened in the Strait of Hormuz, that broke trust in the global energy market, and that made energy an even bigger national security risk, especially for countries that depend on areas like the Strait of Hormuz. When you see a country like the US go in there and disrupt it without taking into consideration the impact on their allies and rivals like China, then that kind of kicks off the domino effect. And part of the domino effect is these countries will respond by becoming energy self-sufficient in the long term. And
absolutely.
So by doing that, though, that will make the markets less competitive because now they're investing in energy sources that are maybe not as competitive, not as cheap as the current systems we have in place, like importing from the Strait of Hormuz. And that's not good for economically. It's not good because obviously capital markets, any interference in capital markets is generally not good on a holistic level when it comes to growth. So this is one area where the economic impact is not being taken into consideration and is something that will be felt for many, many years to come, potentially decades to come, similar to that shift in Europe, for example, away from nuclear energy when they need nuclear power because of whatever incident and fears of other incidents. And now we're feeling the effects of that decades later, where now they're reverting their stance on nuclear power. We may see the same thing happen with the Gulf. So when we have stability, globalization flourishes. When we have instability, all countries start thinking about self-preservation, and that involves the example you've just listed.
Let me tell you about the last point you mentioned, the last statement about self-preservation and trying to protect, in a sense, every man on his own. Look what happened for the last week or so. We have over 20 countries around the world that export petroleum products. They stopped exporting them. They halted all exports, including China.
Yeah.
And that is causing a different ripple effect from Hormuz. To give you an example, we have, as we speak right now, we have jet fuel shortages in many areas around the world. And those jet fuel shortages, not all of them because of Hormuz Strait. Jet fuel supplies declined by half. Half of that half because of actions like China, because they halted the exports to other countries. So that has a different ripple effect because it's a completely different market, because people who are not dependent on the Gulf at all are being affected even that way. And that's going to kind of intensify their efforts to be self-sufficient in energy, because the ripple effect came from outside the Gulf.
Yeah, I'm just seeing an article now on Reuters. Vietnam braces flight cuts in April after China, Thailand banned jet fuel exports. Vietnamese authorities have warned the country's aviation industry to prepare for potential flight reductions from April after China and Thailand halted exports of jet fuel due to the Iran war, increasing the likelihood of shortages.
Yep.
Oof. Why wasn't that all taken into consideration before starting this war, or was it?
These things, basically, whenever we talk about unintended consequences, we do have enough evidence from day one that the Trump administration does not have people who think about unintended consequences. In fact, in our reports, including our daily reports, we always talk about this, that in fact, we do warn about certain unintended consequences. I mean, for experts and people in the market, they can think of certain unintended consequences, but there are unintended consequences that we learn about as we go. So the second order, third order, fourth order consequence, we learn about them as we go. We can predict certain things based on past events, but not all of them. And that's one of the problems that people do not think about. So this is a big issue, and I think we are learning as we go about certain consequences that we never even realized before.
You said something earlier. You said, before actually that, I want to talk about the statement you've made about the US weaponizing LNG. But before that, you talked about how horrible this is for the Gulf. So why, other than the disruption when it comes to energy, why is it so horrible to the Gulf? Is it because of the reputational damage as a safe haven? There's worries about capital flight or flight of tourists. What is it? What is the real concern that you have? Because in my mind, I think that all of them, not just the energy.
It is literally all the above. Everything you mentioned in terms of reputational damage, in terms of capital flight. I mean, we've seen some of the richest people in the world basically coming to the region because they want to live in the region. Okay. And I'm not going to, I literally got phone calls from some of those people saying, should I leave? And I told them, look, I have no answer. I don't know what to say. But when you have some of the richest people on earth asking whether they should leave the area or not, that tells you the whole story. And there is, earlier we talked about trust being shattered. There are several trusts or convictions being shattered right now. So literally between Netanyahu, Trump, and Khamenei or whoever you want to call in Iran, between those three, basically, they literally shattered several trusts in the region. Among them, basically, is within the Gulf states itself.
But if the war ends, there's also the possibility things can go back to normal as well. People tend to forget relatively quickly. There's a lot of war-torn countries that actually rebounded relatively well after the war.
Well, it takes time. I mean, at least you can say that. But when it comes, as you know, when it comes to rich people relocating, I think there is a big question mark.
How, you talked about the global impact on energy markets. Let's talk about the global economy. How significant will that impact be, and which economies do you think will be hit the most? It looks like Asia is already suffering the most. So Gulf, their GDP is going to contract pretty significantly. I'll put them above all, the only ones above the Gulf would probably be Iran. Then comes, and maybe Lebanon, then comes the Gulf and Israel, and then Asian economies and maybe Europe afterwards. And then economies that would do well would probably be the US and Russia. What's your analysis?
Generally speaking, in the short run, China is protected. And we are seeing, we need to wait probably another week or two to find out exactly whether the statement I'm going to say right now is correct or not. But so far, we can conclude the following about China when it comes to oil. It seems that, or energy in general, it seems that China is giving priority to energy security and national security at the expense of cost. We were expecting the Chinese to flood the oil market from day one to prevent prices from going up. We did not see that. That means, and I said, basically, we've seen their inventories going up. That means they are really giving priority to energy security and national security at the expense of cost. India got hurt really hard on several fronts. Yeah. And has nothing to do with policy, by the way. It has to do with geographic location. You cannot blame the Indian government for acting or enacting something. This is about geographic location. It's natural. You have increased regional trade. It's always cheaper. It's always better. It's been safe all along, etc. There were no problems, and all of a sudden they got hit really hard. Whether you talk about oil, you talk about LNG, you talk about gas, you talk about fertilizers, you talk about methanol, you talk about aluminum, too many things. And it goes both ways, by the way, because India export to the Gulf, no one is talking about that right now. We are talking just about one-sided story. We still need to know what's going to happen to the Indian exports and other Asian exports to the Gulf, because we got kind of busy with one-sided story. We still need to look at the other side. The other issue is that Europe got hit really hard. And the issue with Europe is more policy than geographic location. So India because of geographic location, Europe because of policy. So Europe paid the price for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Europe paid the price for the problems in the Red Sea. Now Europe is paying the price for what's happening in Iran. So they've been paying the price all along, but mostly it's policy oriented than anything else. But the countries that suffered the most in terms of relative suffering are really the poorest countries in the world. Whether you talk about countries like Bangladesh, talk about Pakistan, Vietnam, or you go to Africa and start taking country by country from Egypt down to Kenya, to Tanzania, to South Africa, etc. And then you go down to Latin America, and those poorer countries are going to suffer the most. And that's where the impact is going to be on exchange rates, is going to be on trade. I think the IMF will be very active in the next couple of years with those countries because they cannot afford an import bill the same way we are seeing right now. At the same time, there is a bigger issue that we are seeing. As you know, and we talked about this, I think, before on one of the shows regarding the energy demand of AI. Look at the situation and try to think about the risk to AI future based on what happened. Just like the whole world economy becomes a hostage to those energy issues. And what's strange about this is that all of this is written in the National Security Strategy that was released last November by the Trump administration. They literally talked about dominance through two things, through abundance of energy sources and AI. But we know you cannot have AI
together.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, Nitra. I'll say they come together anyway. AI, you can't have AI is all dependent on energy. Energy is AI. Correct. AI is energy.
And therefore, it boils down to one thing: energy. Period.
Yeah.
And we've seen this stated clearly that the objective in this strategy is to make energy abundant for the United States and cheap, while more expensive to other countries. So regardless of what you see at Hormuz Strait, whether you believe this is part of that strategy or not, forget about all of that. Let's talk about the consequences, whether it is intended or not. The consequence basically is higher energy costs for everyone else. Now look at the United States, what's going on. Look at the WTI price and look at Oman price, where India basically other countries are paying the Oman marker price. Oman market price basically exceeded the $173, while WTI did not even exceed 100. We never seen this differential before.
Wow. Wow.
Okay?
I'm just looking at a
So
price
yes,
now.
oil is cheap in the United States, expensive for the rest of the world. So what was mentioned in the strategy already happened. You look at natural gas, you look at the natural gas and Henry Hub prices in the United States, and look at LNG prices outside. The difference is huge. So yes, energy prices in the United States remain low, while the whole world is paying the higher price. So you look at AI and you want to relocate your company, you are going to look for the cheap energy. Where you are going to go?
Yeah, that's well said. That's why I say like this. A lot of people are talking how this get a war, me included, how this was a massive strategic mistake, etc. I'm like, I think so as well. The US cannot afford when it comes to stockpile, munition stockpiles, how thin the military spread, debt. All these reasons are why the US cannot, should not be in a prolonged war. However, if the conclusion of this war is a new regime that's more willing to work with the US or US control of the Strait of Hormuz in some way, long term, that could be a massive win for the US. Horrible for the Gulf, horrible for Europe, Asia, all American allies. Maybe good because America has to offer them energy. But the energy, as you've broken down before, the cost will go up either way. Market forces will just bring it up anyway because of the increased risk. However, the biggest winner could end up being the US if Trump gains the Strait of Hormuz, and the biggest loser is China. If he loses it, that could be one of the biggest strategic mistakes of his presidency.
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, whether it's a mistake or not, we will let history determine that. But one thing is clear, and I want to clarify to the audience because it is very important. We have many negative things happening to the United States from this war. So yes, we might end up with stagflation worldwide. We might end up with a recession. The US basically might end up in a deep recession, etc. But if you look at the benefits and you look at the cost in terms of all those problems, those costs are in the short run. The benefits are in the short run, the medium run, and the long run. So we have to make those differences. The other issue is if there is an intention to achieve all of those based on that strategy, that means this is the deep state. And the deep state does not care about elections. The deep state does not care about who is the president. They dumped Nixon, they impeached him, they threw him out. We might end up with the same situation here, but the deep state will get what it wanted. Will we end up with policy failure? Yes, because we have thousands of books and articles and presentations on policy failures throughout the world. So we might end up with that. But the idea here is we have to make a distinction between the Trump administration, Trump as president, the elections, and the deep state. This is not a Trump thing. If you look at what happened in terms of Trump was talking against China, was against China. Then Biden came in and continued the same policy against China. Yeah. The trade wars basically continued. That tells you this is a deep state.
I agree. I 100% agree. What I don't understand though is who makes the final call? Does the deep state influence Trump or does Trump influence the deep state? Does the deep state influence the president or does the president influence the deep state?
There are two things here that we have to focus on when we analyze this. The first one is he and his team are going to make the execution. Whether the execution basically is bad, wrong, good, terrible, excellent, that's a different story. So where the Trump administration could go wrong is on the execution, and therefore they can affect the deep state plan by bad execution, and the influence will be great in this case. So that's one distinction. The other distinction is several of the actors of the deep state basically will stay in their positions regardless of who is in the White House. Because not all the positions in the deep state basically are elected. And therefore they can stay and they can either kind of maintain the idea that things will go this way or not. But the bottom line here is, let's forget about the whole discussion about whether this was intended or not. The issue here is, we know what the impact is going to be and who is going to benefit from that impact, whether you are talking about the politics of it, you are talking about the economics of it, or the finance of it. And the benefits to the United States from what happened by closing the Hormuz Strait in the long run are priceless. And the losses to China and everyone else are tremendous. And if this war is going to continue from now until the end of May, China will be in deep trouble. Because China is well protected in the short run. But after that, they'll start running out of many things. I mean, if the war stay until the end of May, that will be kind of the end of what China prepared for.
Why? Unless Iran controls the straits and continues exporting to China, if China does a deal with Iran to continue exporting, and Iran has the upper hand in terms of who controls the straits, who allows ships to go in and out, wouldn't that be okay for China? Wouldn't that? And there's already reports of Iran speaking to Pakistan, Malaysia, I think, India, and China to do some sort of deal.
This is kind of really something, I mean, if you look at the numbers, you look at everything, that this is kind of really something very, very minor. The issue here is we do have massive storage of almost everything in China that can last for about 3 months. So if this war is going to continue, after 3 months, China is not going to have some of the storage that they have, and therefore how they are going to operate their economy. That's really, forget about Iran completely. And
but Iran, what am I missing though? Because China will struggle because they cannot export out of the straits. But if Iran allows ships heading to China to go through, wouldn't that avoid a Chinese negative impact or significant negative impact?
Iran is allowing the oil exports of Iran basically to get out of the Hormuz Strait. But as we speak, there are large number of tankers, probably at least 60 or above oil tankers that are full of oil waiting near China and near Malaysia. So why China has to wait on Iranian oil to leave the Gulf while this oil is sitting in front of them? So the whole idea here is they want that Iranian flow to continue is not correct, because they have that 60, 70...
Can you answer the rhetorical question you asked? Why is there ships sitting there on the Malaysian coast?
Simply because there is no market for them. So the Chinese basically, I think this is, I don't have any evidence on this, but I'm going to say.
But what do you mean? Sorry, but what do you mean no market for them? Everyone wants oil. Why wouldn't there be a market for the oil?
This is sanctioned oil. No one can buy it except China, because China does not care about US sanctions. If someone else wants to break the sanctions, then they will be in trouble with the US. And not only the oil is sanctioned, the ships themselves are sanctioned, so they cannot go to any port. And that's why the US is thinking right now about lifting the sanctions so they can allow the Iranian oil and the Iranian ships to go to certain ports and unload. But there is a big question here. If they allow this, probably it might happen within the next few hours, by the way. If this allowed this to happen, then two things will happen here. The first thing is, I think there will be a condition that whoever is going to get the Iranian oil, the sanctions are still in effect. The only waiver basically is to be able to allow the sanctioned ship to come to your port and provide service to it, and allow that oil to be unloaded, but you will not be allowed to pay Iran. That money has to go to an escrow account for a frozen asset in a bank somewhere. So Iran is not going to benefit. And if this oil goes to other countries, then China will not have an access to it. The question is, since the US announced this yesterday, we need to check right now to see if China is trying to grab those tankers before the Trump administration basically get them. We don't know,
Yeah.
but we will know
But
in the next 2 days.
where I'm confused and asked as a final question is, you're saying China will struggle if this goes on for longer, but then you're also saying that there's a lot of tankers on the coast of Malaysia that China could import, and Iran could allow ships to keep coming out and supplying China. So if there's ships already next to China, next to the Chinese coast, that China just, there's too much of it, they don't need it yet. And if Iran can continue supplying, as long as they control the straits, can continue supplying or letting cargo ships with the Chinese oil to go through, Chinese gas and oil to go through, then wouldn't China be okay? Where is the issue for China if they have supply now and they can continue getting supply if Iran continues controlling the straits?
I think China was counting on that, counting on the Iranian floating storage, that's what the name of it, to get it. But now the Trump administration basically is trying to put its hand on it so they can prevent China from taking it, while they can offer that oil to other nations trying to prevent oil prices from going up. So I think China did not think about the possibility of Trump putting his hand on them. And that's where the issue is.
And for long term, Trump could also block ships from coming out of the straits and choke off China. So this is China's issue. Trump not letting ships heading to China go through.
I think they can do that in so many ways. I mean, there are so many tricks that can be played to block those ships from going in and out. And in fact, even under international law, for example, and they can say, okay, I'm going to board this ship. It's a container ship. I'm going to board it because I suspect they are sending arms to Iran. And whether it is true or not, it doesn't matter. But they can stall the ship for a week just under this suspicion.
Yeah, I agree. Anas, absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time. Great analysis.
Have a great